Hello, my fellow DC fans. So James Gunn has promised LGBTQ plus representation in his new DC universe. This doesn't surprise me in the slightest. I think he's a man capable of making Batman and Superman bi. He did put some letters by the names when he was talking about LGBTQ representation, and I don't really know what he meant. Do I have a problem with LGBTQ representation in film, in entertainment? I don't. But, there's this old saying in the UK, say it, don't spray it. What do I mean by this? The problem is when you start talking about LGBTQ representation, it polarizes members of the audience. Should it polarize members of the audience? Of course it shouldn't, but it does. The reality of the world we live in today, it's very polarizing, and some people don't like it when creatives talk this way because it scares them. Not always necessarily through, being homophobic or transphobic, but just it's that virtue signaling angle that Hollywood have, because Hollywood right now are pretending to be allies of the LGBTQ community, and it's not necessarily the truth. Because Hollywood have attempted already LGBTQ representation in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it hasn't worked because they don't treat the community as ordinary human beings. It doesn't matter if you're gay or trans, you're still a person with your complexities, right? You don't know what it's like to be me because you ain't trod in my shoes, and I don't know what it's like to be you. So if we're going to represent these communities, we have to be honest about that representation, but they must be treated in the same way that the mainstream straight people are, in a way, as people, as characters with complexities. What would it be like for a straight person to, for an ordinary straight male to fall in love with a trans woman? Stories. We want to educate people. I keep on talking about this every day. But Hollywood don't have the same intentions, because it really is the way you sell these things that matter. There's not really much point in talking about LGBTQ representation in DC Universe before you do it. But when you start talking about it, it's the way you talk about it. And as I say, people do get triggered by this type of talk. It doesn't trigger me in the slightest. I want to see it done properly. All different communities from the human race deserve representation. The problem with Hollywood today, the inclusion and representation has become more important than the entertainment, than, the character development. And this is what really gets them in trouble. When they talk about LGBTQ representation, I keep on getting the letters mixed up. I'm sure you've noticed. I'm not sure. Is it LGBTQ? Is it LGBTQ? I don't know. So apologies to anyone who gets upset about those type of things. I want to seriously talk about this issue today, because where are all the trans stories? They keep on telling us they're allies to the trans and gay community. But where are the stories? Where are the good stories? They made a gay romantic comedy called Bros, and it was lame, and it was transparent, and it wasn't any good. There's very few, there's been very few good trans, films or television shows out there. I think there was one called Transparent. Is that one? Which was apparently supposed to be quite good, which I never saw. And also, we've got to talk about mass appeal. And, at the end of the day, the entertainment industry, is an entertainment industry. It's a business. It's there to make money. And I think that if, like, for example, could we live in a world where the central characters were trans? or gay? Would that work? Would that appeal to the masses? I mean, get in the comments down below. I'm not making a judgment on that. I'm asking the question, would that work? Because we live in a different world today, and we're not going back. For example, the trans community are part of the mainstream. So I'm part of the 70s. When I was growing up, the trans community were not part of the mainstream. The trans community being part of the mainstream is a new thing. So we talk about representation. We talk about representation mattering. But a lot of the audience reject that type of representation. We should live in a world where love is love. We absolutely should live in that world. I do believe that love is love, but I'm not going to sit here and attack people who get triggered by it. But, you know, no matter what you think, this is the world we live in. We're not going back. We're not going to go back to a time where you're only going to see straight white people playing the main characters and being the main characters. This is the future. Whether you like it or not, this is what's going to happen now. I'm not here to trigger you. I'm not here to upset you, but I'm telling you, there is no going back. And there's so many accusations of pandering. We had South Park, the Pandaverse, and as I've said on a previous video, I don't think they were mocking Lucasfilm so much, but maybe pandering in general doesn't work. I don't believe deciding to have representation and inclusion is pandering, but it actually depends how you do it. You can pander to fans to do a certain thing, and in the end it doesn't work. That's why entertainers and writers and directors should do their own thing, go with their gut. I've said that before as well. But we're not going back to the old days, whether you think they're the good old days or not. And if you're unhappy with the way things are going, you really need to dust off your superior, physical media. Because I don't believe there's a lot of good films being made out there. The problem is that people working in Hollywood today who claim they're allies to these communities are not really allies. It is pandering. And, now James Gunn has always been, ideologically this way inclined. He is a liberal. He is a Democrat. He got himself in trouble. He got exposed for those historical tweets because every day after he did Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, he was going after the Republicans on Twitter, and the right wing got so upset they were looking for some dirt on him. They found it and got him fired. This is where we are today. Because the way we used to talk about ideology and politics was a lot more softer. And we could all debate, give each other a kiss and a cuddle, and say we're still friends no matter what our political and ideological views are. But we don't live in that society today. It's become a big war. And it shouldn't be a war, especially around entertainment. And this is where the rise of the fandom menace has come, and they've really stirred the pot. The fandom menace is predominantly right-wing. I am not right-wing. My father was a moderate left-winger. He voted for the Labour Party all his life in the UK. I've voted once in my entire life, and that was for Labour to get Tony Blair into government. And that was it. I've never voted since. But I don't want this to be a political conversation because I don't think representing the LGBTQ community is political if you're genuine about doing it. How can we do it? I've spoken about Marvel and what they could have and should have done in terms of the trans and gay communities, right? It really is interesting because the gay community used to get a lot of hate. But now because the trans community have suddenly been brought into the mainstream, the focus has been put on them. And I believe that the so-called allies and the so-called haters are just as bad as each other, and they're both gaslighting the trans community. The trans community don't want to be the focus. They just want to get on with their lives, and they should be allowed. And there should be good trans characters in all types of stories and all types of movies. But as I say, It's a new thing in the mainstream, and these things take time. Look back to like 60, 70 years ago, where you barely saw any black people on film, and when you did, they were literally playing servants and slaves and criminals. They're the facts. Then you saw the uprising of Denzel Washington and Eddie Murphy, and that changed that narrative. That was a good thing, but it took time. But the thing is, with Washington and Murphy, they deserved to be there. They weren't necessarily, they weren't successful because they were black. They were successful because they happened to, no, not even that. They were successful because on their own merits, but they wanted to represent their community. They wanted to use the color of their skin to promote good. But you can't just put people out there because of the color of their skin, their sexual orientation, or their gender. It has to be talent first. You should deserve to be in the position you're in. But of course, we want to see representation. But what's even more important in going forward, especially if he's talking about, LGBTQ representation in this brand new universe, it can't be pandering. It has to be done properly. If you make them great characters, you educate people at the same time. So just imagine, right? There's a bunch of DC fans who hate the trans community. I would hate to think that, but let's just say. But you create a great trans character, right? And you create a beautiful love story between a straight guy and doesn't necessarily normally attracted to like a trans person or anything like that, but falls in love with a trans woman, just for example, but you create a good story. Then the hater all of a sudden thinks about it. I like this character, but this character's trans. But if they hate, but then they're learning. And what you're doing there is you're educating someone who is a product of their own time. And all of a sudden, because of the inspiration of one trans character, you have created something very, very special, because instead of hate, you've given education. But we live in a world where everyone's pointing fingers at each other, and this is the problem. I've been on Twitter already where people are very angry about James Gunn saying there'll be LGBTQ representation in DC Universe. And, it's an automatic thing for some people, because I've said this before as well. There's an element of paranoia between consumer and creative now. The relationship between us and Hollywood has become polarized. We don't trust them. They don't like us, and we don't trust them anymore, because they've become so locked in their own ideologies. They're right. If you don't agree with them, you're bad. Basically, there's only left or right. Basically, it's like what George Lucas wrote down in a piece of dialogue for, I think it's Revenge of the Sith, as Obi-Wan and Anakin Skywalker are about to fight. The Sith deals with absolutes, and that's the problem. And human beings are complicated people, whether they're straight, good-looking, Anglo-Greek Cypriot guys, or trans or whatever. We're all complicated. We're not good. We're not bad. We're a bit of everything. But unfortunately, I see on the internet all the time, you see judgmental people judging other people. The beautiful Matt Perry, who died only last week, a man who was suffering with addiction. I remember the Friends reunion, and cruel people on the internet were mocking that man for struggling in that reunion, and credit to his Friends cast members trying to protect him in that interview. But it was very hard, and it was hard for me to see people mocking him. So we do live now in a very, very cruel world. And, I want to live in a world of acceptance where having the LGBTQ community as part of a superhero franchise is the norm. And it's not a call to war. It's not something that upsets everyone. And so, James Gunn wants, is James Gunn pandering? Is James Gunn being woke, or does James Gunn really care about proper representation? Representing the trans and gay communities responsibly. Does he want to do that? Is that the responsibility he wants? Or does he just want to pander, to look politically correct? Because there is a difference. That's the question I would ask any Hollywood creative right now. Do you care about these communities? Do you care about not gaslighting them? Do you care about representing them in the right way? Or are you just doing it for woke points? And there is a difference. There's a big difference, because I think we're basically standing on a line now where we either go one way or the other. We can create an environment where we represent these people as ordinary people, because they are. They're like you and me. They either just happen to have changed their gender because they were locked in another body that they felt wasn't theirs, right? Which must be, you don't even know. I don't even know how that feels, let's be honest. Or being gay or whatever. So you want to, first of all, when you're writing, and I write a lot of stories, I write plays for my, Amateur Dramatic Society, and if you're writing, for example, for a gay character or a trans character, what you do first, you just treat them normally, because they're just another person. But you have to add that baggage. You have to add the baggage to the character. I'm really looking to write a story about the process of starting off in one body and then being in another body, and just really seeing that. I think for education's sake, and so the world can see what it's really like to be a trans person. And I think that's a good thing to do. But you've got to have responsibility with these things. And if you're not responsible, if your motivations are not for the right reason, then why bother? If you're just going to create, a polarizing environment. But basically, right, even if your intentions are pure to represent the trans and gay community, if all you're going to do is gaslight them, even if you're an ally, because you can gaslight these communities, even if a lot of these people say they're allies, but are they truly allies if they're gaslighting them? Because a lot of these so-called allies are making these communities targets. And that's the real issue here. And this is the problem with Hollywood today. They'll wear a rainbow badge. But wearing a badge doesn't change anything. Saying you're an ally doesn't change anything. Say it, don't spray it. That's my point. And this is an important moment in our time, in our history, because as I said earlier, we're not going back. This is the world we live in. It's a much more complicated world than it was when I was growing up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even the noughties, right? Obviously, I wasn't growing up in all of them. I grew up to be an adult eventually, but even the early noughties weren't like this, right? Even when I'm rewatching Friends right now, and some of the jokes would just not be acceptable today. That's how much we've changed, because we live in a much evolved society. The problem is with evolved societies, they want to control how you think and what you say, and we're all worried about people being affected by any word we say today. So as I say, there is that element of paranoia. So I think it's a time now where we bring people into Hollywood studios and, streamers and broadcasters who, first of all, have got the ability and the nuance and the talent to tell great stories about anyone, whether it's a straight white male, a trans person, a gay person, whatever. You still got to treat them as a caricature. You've still got to give them their complexities. But that's not what's happening today. I said this before about the first female doctor played by Jodie Whittaker. Narratively, Chibnall wrapped cotton wool around her, and all of a sudden, the doctor wasn't this flawed, complex character. She was a flawless character because she was a woman. And women are flawless. No, women are just like anybody else. They're complicated and they're flawed, and they don't always do the right thing. But this is the problem with the extreme left, which almost certainly, ideologically, James Gunn is part of that movement as well. They see everything in absolutes, in black and white, and they are gaslighting the communities they claim to be an ally for. And this is the problem. This is why I've always said we need to get these extremists out of entertainment. I want to see moderate people, I want to see talented people working in this industry that are still happy to represent these communities, but as I say, treat them as caricatures rather than just saying, well, it's good to be seen. We didn't have to give you a good storyline. You could just stand there. So we can say we represented you. Why should a trans, gay, black, Asian person or whatever feel grateful for being represented? These people should be in films. These people should be in TV shows. But you've got to treat them like everybody else, right? And the most talented people from those communities should be the ones we're watching, not anyone. You shouldn't be cast in something. You shouldn't be given a job in this industry just because you happen to be black or trans. That is a different thing as well. There has to be a responsibility here, because if we can write great stories for these communities and we can educate people and we can inspire people, that's what we should be doing. Because right now, our whole world is divided, not just in the entertainment industry, because the wrong ideological community are running all these industries. And it's all about hot takes and division and hatred. And already, just by James Gunn saying that he wants LGBTQ representation in DC Universe, it's become, some people won't be happy. Some people will even may boycott the films. And that's not what you want. So the very element of announcing LGBTQ representation may give you that cool PC badge, but it doesn't do anything for relations, between different factions, different political opinions. This is the problem. It is the way you sell these things. And what you want to do is, there's no need to announce there's going to be LGBTQ representation in DC Universe. Just do it. Do it. Why are you talking about it? Why aren't you just doing it? Because you want credit before you do it. You want to show everyone where you stand. You want to make your position clear. By making your position clear, maybe you're not so much of an ally. Because if you were an ally, you would just be getting on with writing LGBTQ characters for DC Universe and showing them to us. We know in Creature Commandos, I think there's two gay people or something like that in that group, and they have a relationship or something along those lines. We already know that. I mean, I'm not an expert on Creature Commandos, so I know what he's talking about because he does it. He's doing it in his first animated series. I'm fine with that. It's great to see people of the same gender having relationships and doing it in an educational way. There's a lot of hatred out there. The truth is, there's a lot of people that hate, that will always hate. And that's never going to change. So there's some people we simply can't help. There's some people we simply can't educate. There's some people we will never change. And that's okay. I'm not into bashing my head against a brick wall because I don't like living off of paracetamol. I have enough problems with paracetamol through all the hangovers I have every morning. But the point is that there's a way to do, there is good representation and bad representation. And what I hope for this new DC Universe, that it does things properly. James Gunn is more than capable of having relationships between two people and doing them well, but because he's a good writer and he can do that. But the issue is these announcements that we hear before we see anything. Yes, I'm representing the LGBTQ community. Aren't I good? Not really. Why do you deserve a badge? Why? You want these people, as I said earlier, you want these people to thank you just because they're being represented, just because they're seeing each other on the big screen. Let me be absolutely clear to you. The extreme left and the extreme right have got the microphone right now, especially in the entertainment industry. You're either one way or the other. And the moderate people, the reasonable people, are not being listened to. If you want good representation and inclusion, it's going to come from talented, moderate people, not extremists. But unfortunately, right now, the extremists have got a stranglehold on the entertainment industry. And until we can force those people out and bring more balanced, moderate people into the industry, we're going to keep on having problems like this. And as I say, announcing it doesn't really matter. You know, we have the whole thing about Rachel Zegler playing Snow White. And kind of a lot of people have made the point. She's called Snow White for a reason. And I mean, that is a good point. I still think if Rachel Zegler was a reasonable young woman and she can give a good performance as the character, why not? Was Rachel Zegler the best person for the job? Well, she can certainly bellow out a note. She's a very good singer, and I'm assuming it's going to be a bit of a musical as well. But when you've got someone as arrogant as Rachel, you know, and not self-aware at all and has no emotional intelligence, and she's coming out slaughtering the original version of the story, that's not the way to do it. If you don't want Prince Charming to be the main element of the film, do that. Again, say it, don't spray it. These people are too busy spraying it instead of saying it. You can do these things in your film and let the audience, let the consumer make their own minds up. But when you're gaslighting your own customer before they've tasted the packet of fruit pastels, then you create a problem. And this is where we are in entertainment. We're here everywhere, right? We have a trans woman right now, like being involved with adverts for an alcoholic beverage, and there's been controversy there because I think sometimes we look at people, we say, yeah, are you genuine? Are you genuine about helping your own community, or are you trying to gaslight the situation? So, for example, this same trans person was, I think, nominated as Woman of the Year or something like that, which is a very controversial concept. Now, I am quite happy to say, right, if this is the greatest woman, right, that's of the year, that's done things, that's been charitable, that has inspired me, I'm happy to take it on the chin and say, okay, you deserve your award. But this is what pandering's about. And this is what's going on in different industries today. It's pandering. And that's the problem. And we're getting a lot of pandering for lots of different communities, which is making them targets, which is gaslighting them. And you don't need to do that. And this is what DC Universe doesn't need. Because let's not forget, the last DC franchise wasn't exactly a glowing success, even though I love the Snyderverse. So a lot of people already have doubts over you, James Gunn. And making these announcements doesn't help you. It's not going to help you get what you need. That's the problem. In the end, you kneecap yourself before you start. Say it, don't spray it. I think it's a brilliant kind of turn of phrase. And that's the problem. This is where we are today. This is where this industry is today, because they're not very good at public relations. That's the problem. Their PR is terrible because they have no filter. They don't have any filter whatsoever, and they just say anything that upsets people. We get these female actors coming out saying, I don't want to look a certain way to please men, or some nonsense like that. And it's like, you're a very attractive young woman. You do wear makeup, right? You are doing everything you say you're not going to do. And you're a hypocrite. And then they say, we want to inspire young girls to do the same. Well, let me tell you this. If a young girl on Instagram is prancing around in a bikini, every day, they're going to say to you, mind your own beeswax. If I want to wear a bikini, if I want to wear my, underwear on social media, who are you to say you're going to inspire me not to? Everyone has different ideas. Everyone has different ideologies. And the entertainment industry shouldn't be It shouldn't be dictating to this generation what they do. But yes, James Gunn has promised LGBTQ representation for the new DC universe. Let's see what happens there, if anything.